Tonight we dive into one of the most mysterious and breathtaking places on our planet. The frozen kingdoms beneath the polar ice, hidden under the vast sheets of the Arctic and Antarctic, lies a world teeming with life. Seals and penguins navigating the icy waters, tiny krill that sustain entire ecosystems, strange organisms clinging to ice crystals, and fish that have evolved to survive in temperatures that should be impossible. These frozen frontiers not only harbor incredible biodiversity, but also play a crucial role in regulating Earth's climate, a delicate balance now threatened by melting ice. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Beneath the world's most inhospitable landscapes lies a secret realm that defies every expectation of what life should be, where temperatures plummet to -40 degrees Celsius, where darkness reigns for months at a time, and where ice stretches endlessly across horizons. There exists a thriving underwater universe more alien than anything science fiction could imagine. Welcome to the polar oceans, the Arctic in the north and Antarctica in the south, where life has not merely survived, but flourished in conditions that would instantly kill most organisms on Earth. These are the frozen kingdoms, vast realms beneath miles of ice, where creatures have evolved extraordinary adaptations that challenge our understanding of biological possibility. For centuries, humans viewed the polar regions as lifeless wastelands, frozen deserts where nothing could possibly survive. Early explorers spoke of dead seas locked beneath eternal ice, places where the very concept of life seemed impossible. They could not have been more wrong. Today, we know that these polar waters teem with life in ways that rival tropical rainforests in their complexity and biodiversity. The polar oceans are home to microscopic organisms that literally live within ice crystals, their bodies adapted to function at temperatures that would freeze solid the blood of most animals. Here swim fish, whose blood contains natural antifreeze proteins, allowing them to glide through waters that hover just above the freezing point. Massive marine mammals have evolved layers of blubber so thick they can maintain their body temperature in water that would kill a human in minutes. But perhaps most remarkably, these frozen kingdoms serve as the planet's climate regulators, vast engines that drive ocean currents, moderate global temperatures, and influence weather patterns across every continent. The ice shelves that cap these polar seas are not mere frozen water. They are complex ecosystems where life clings to existence in the most marginal spaces imaginable, and they are the planet's natural air conditioning system. Yet these ancient realms are changing faster than they have in hundreds of thousands of years. The ice is melting, the water is warming, and the delicate balance that has sustained life in these extreme environments for millions of years is shifting beneath the feet or fins of every creature that calls these places home. This is the story of the frozen kingdoms, of the incredible life forms that inhabit the world's most extreme environments, and of how changes in these remote regions affect every living thing on our planet. It is a story of adaptation, survival, and the profound interconnectedness of life on Earth. It is also a story of rapid change, as these ancient ecosystems face an uncertain future in our warming world. To understand life beneath the polar ice, we must first understand the ice itself. The frozen kingdoms are built upon foundations more complex and dynamic than the most sophisticated human architecture. The ice sheets of Antarctica and the Arctic are not simple layers of frozen water. They are vast, living systems that breathe with the seasons, flex with the tides, and create microenvironments that support an astonishing array of life. Antarctica, the southern continent, is home to the largest ice sheet on Earth. This massive structure contains about 90% of the world's fresh water locked in ice that averages over a mile thick and in some places reaches depths of nearly 3 miles. The Antarctic ice sheet covers an area larger than the United States and Mexico combined, and if it were to melt completely, global sea levels would rise by nearly 200 feet. But the ice sheet is just one component of Antarctica's frozen architecture. Extending from the continent's edges are ice shelves, massive floating platforms of ice that can be hundreds of feet thick and stretch for hundreds of miles into the ocean. The Ross Ice Shelf alone is roughly the size of France, a floating ice platform that serves as a ceiling over one of the planet's most unique ecosystems. In the Arctic, the architecture is different, but no less remarkable. Here, there is no continent at the center, only ocean covered by a shifting mosaic of sea ice. This Arctic sea ice is constantly in motion, driven by currents and winds, creating a dynamic landscape of ice flows, pressure ridges, and open water leads. Unlike Antarctic ice shelves, which can be thousands of years old, Arctic sea ice is relatively young, rarely surviving more than a few years before melting or being crushed and reformed. The structure of polar ice creates countless microenvironments where life can take hold. Within the ice itself, networks of tiny channels and pockets form as salt is expelled during the freezing process. These brine channels, some no wider than a human hair, become highways for microscopic life. The bottom surfaces of ice shelves and sea ice develop complex topographies of ridges, valleys, and hanging gardens where organisms can attach and feed. Where ice meets water, some of the ocean's most productive ecosystems develop. The underside of sea ice becomes a nursery for algae, which form the foundation of polar food webs. These ice algae can create blooms so dense they color the underside of ice sheets brown and green, visible from space when the ice breaks apart. The seasonal dynamics of polar ice create rhythms that pulse through every level of these ecosystems. In the Arctic, the annual cycle of freezing and thawing drives migrations and reproduction cycles for countless species. Summer brings 24 hours of daylight and massive ice melt, creating enormous blooms of phytoplankton that feed everything from microscopic zooplankton to massive baleen whales. Antarctica's seasonal changes are equally dramatic, but operate on different scales. The continent is surrounded by the Southern Ocean, where sea ice can advance and retreat over areas the size of continents. During Antarctic winter, sea ice coverage can double, creating temporary habitat for species that depend on the ice edge for feeding and breeding. The physical properties of polar ice also create unique opportunities for life. Ice is less dense than water, so it floats, creating an insulating layer that keeps the water below from freezing completely. But polar ice is not pure. It contains pockets of concentrated seawater that remain liquid even at temperatures well below the normal freezing point of water. These brine pockets become microhabitats for specialized organisms. The pressure dynamics beneath ice shelves create yet another unique environment. Water beneath these massive ice platforms can be supercooled, colder than the normal freezing point, but still liquid due to pressure and salt content. When this supercooled water encounters objects or rises toward the surface where pressure decreases, it can instantly freeze, creating bizarre formations of anchor ice and ice stalactites that hang like chandeliers from the bottom of ice shelves. The color and clarity of polar ice reveal much about the life within it. Fresh glacial ice appears blue because it absorbs red light while transmitting blue wavelengths. But sea ice often appears white or gray due to trapped air bubbles and algae. When ice algae bloom, they can turn entire sections of sea ice green or brown, creating a patchwork of colors visible from space. Understanding this architecture of ice is crucial because every crack, channel, and interface represents potential habitat. Life in the polar oceans has learned to exploit every available niche, from the microscopic brine channels within ice crystals to the vast spaces beneath continental ice shelves. The physical structure of these frozen kingdoms determines where life can exist, how it can move, and what resources are available for survival. As climate change alters the extent, thickness, and permanence of polar ice, it fundamentally changes the architecture of these ecosystems. Ice that once persisted for years now melts in a single season. Ice shelves that served as stable platforms for centuries are collapsing into the ocean. The very foundation upon which these frozen kingdoms are built is shifting, and with it, the possibilities for life in some of Earth's most extreme environments. In the depths of polar waters, where temperatures hover just above freezing and ice crystals form in the water column itself, live some of the most remarkably adapted creatures on Earth. These are the polar fish, masters of an environment so extreme that their very existence challenges our understanding of how life functions at the cellular level. The Antarctic notothenioids represent one of evolution's most extraordinary achievements. These fish comprise over 100 species that dominate the waters around Antarctica, making up roughly 90% of all fish biomass in the Southern Ocean. What makes them truly remarkable is not their abundance, but how they survive in waters that would kill most other fish within minutes. The secret lies in their blood. Notothenioid fish produce antifreeze glycoproteins, specialized molecules that prevent ice crystals from forming in their body fluids. These biological antifreezes are far more effective than anything humans have devised, working at concentrations hundreds of times lower than the chemicals we use to dice roads. The antifreeze proteins bind to tiny ice crystals that form in the fish's blood and tissues, preventing them from growing large enough to damage cells. But the antifreeze adaptation comes with costs. These proteins make the fish's blood more viscous, requiring their hearts to work harder to pump it through their bodies. To compensate, many Antarctic fish have evolved enlarged hearts and specialized blood vessels. Some species have also reduced their metabolic rates to conserve energy, living life in a kind of controlled slow motion that allows them to function efficiently in the extreme cold. The ice fish of Antarctica have taken cold adaptation to an even more extreme level. These ghostly pale creatures have evolved to live without hemoglobin, the red blood cell protein that carries oxygen in virtually all other vertebrates. Instead, they rely on oxygen dissolved directly in their blood plasma and have evolved enlarged hearts and blood vessels to circulate this less efficient oxygen delivery system. Living without red blood cells might seem like a disadvantage, but in the frigid Antarctic waters, it offers unique benefits. Cold water holds more dissolved oxygen than warm water, making the ice fish's hemoglobin-free blood system viable. The absence of red blood cells also means their blood flows more easily in the cold, reducing the energy needed to pump it through their bodies. Their pale, translucent appearance gives them their name. In some species, you can see their organs through their skin. Arctic fish have evolved their own remarkable adaptations. The Arctic cod, a keystone species in northern polar waters, produces multiple types of antifreeze proteins and can survive being partially frozen. During extreme cold snaps, ice crystals can actually form in the spaces between their cells without causing death. When conditions warm, the fish simply thaw out and resume normal activity. Polar fish have also evolved unique feeding strategies adapted to their environment. Many Antarctic species feed on krill and other small crustaceans that form dense swarms beneath the ice. Some have developed specialized jaws and filtering systems that allow them to efficiently harvest these small but abundant prey. Others have become opportunistic feeders, taking advantage of the seasonal abundance of food that characterizes polar ecosystems. The slow, cold waters of polar regions have also influenced the life histories of these fish. Many species grow very slowly and live extremely long lives by fish standards. Some Antarctic toothfish can live for over 50 years, growing continuously throughout their lives in the nutrient-rich but frigid waters. This slow growth and long life strategy makes them particularly vulnerable to overexploitation, as it takes decades for populations to recover from fishing pressure. Reproduction in polar fish has also evolved unique characteristics. Many species time their reproduction to coincide with the brief polar summer when food is most abundant. Some produce antifreeze proteins in their eggs, ensuring that their developing offspring can survive in the icy waters from the moment they hatch. Others produce fewer but larger eggs, giving their young a better chance of survival in the harsh polar environment. The sensory adaptations of polar fish are equally remarkable. In the dark depths beneath ice shelves, where sunlight never penetrates, some species have evolved enhanced lateral line systems that can detect the slightest water movements created by prey or predators. Others have developed enlarged eyes to capture what little light filters through the ice, or have evolved to hunt using other senses entirely. Polar fish also play crucial ecological roles beyond their own survival. Many species serve as key links in polar food webs, converting small planktonic organisms into biomass that feeds larger predators like seals, whales, and seabirds. The Arctic cod is so central to Arctic marine ecosystems that it's been called the forage fish of the Arctic. Without it, many other species could not survive in polar waters. The metabolic adaptations of polar fish extend beyond antifreeze proteins. Many species have evolved specialized enzymes that function efficiently at low temperatures, allowing them to maintain essential biochemical processes that would shut down in other fish. Their cell membranes have also been modified to remain flexible at temperatures that would make other fish rigid and unable to move. Some polar fish have even evolved to take advantage of the unique properties of their icy environment. Certain species use the underside of sea ice as hunting grounds, where small crustaceans and other prey concentrate. Others have learned to exploit the seasonal patterns of ice formation and melting, timing their migrations and feeding to coincide with the most productive periods. The diversity of polar fish adaptations represents millions of years of evolution in isolation. As the Southern Ocean and Arctic Ocean became increasingly cold and ice-covered, fish populations became separated from their temperate relatives and evolved along unique paths. The result is a collection of species found nowhere else on Earth, each perfectly adapted to life in conditions that would be instantly fatal to their warm water cousins. In the frigid waters beneath polar ice, there exists a universe built around creatures no larger than a paperclip. Krill, small, shrimp-like crustaceans that swarm in numbers that defy imagination, form the foundation of polar marine ecosystems. These tiny organisms aggregate in swarms so dense they can be seen from space, creating moving clouds of life that support everything from fish to the largest whales on Earth. Antarctic krill, scientifically known as Euphausia superba, are among the most abundant animals on the planet. Conservative estimates place their total biomass at around 500 million tons, roughly twice the weight of all humans on Earth. During their peak abundance, individual swarms can contain millions of individuals packed into areas the size of city blocks, creating underwater blizzards of pink and orange bodies that pulse through the water with synchronized swimming motions. The life cycle of Antarctic krill is perfectly synchronized with the rhythms of polar ice. Adult females release their eggs during the brief Antarctic summer, when food is most abundant and conditions are optimal for larval development. The eggs sink to depths of over 2,000 meters, where they develop slowly in the cold, dark waters. The larvae then make an extraordinary vertical migration, ascending through thousands of meters of water column to reach the surface layers where they will feed and mature. This vertical migration is one of the most remarkable journeys in the ocean. Krill larvae must navigate through multiple water masses with different temperatures, salinities, and current patterns, somehow finding their way to the productive surface waters where their food sources await. Many larvae fail to complete this journey, but those that succeed find themselves in one of the ocean's most productive environments. Adult krill are filter feeders, using specialized appendages called thoracopods to create water currents that bring food particles into their mouths. Their diet consists primarily of phytoplankton, microscopic algae that bloom in massive quantities during the polar summer. But krill are opportunistic feeders, also consuming bacteria, detritus, and even each other when other food sources are scarce. The timing of krill reproduction and feeding is intimately connected to sea ice dynamics. Ice algae that grow on the underside of sea ice provide crucial early season food for krill when phytoplankton blooms have not yet developed. As the ice melts and retreats during summer, it creates ideal conditions for phytoplankton blooms that feed massive krill swarms. Krill have evolved remarkable adaptations for life in polar waters. Like polar fish, they produce antifreeze compounds that prevent ice crystals from forming in their body fluids. They can also slow their metabolism dramatically during winter months when food is scarce, essentially entering a state of suspended animation that allows them to survive on stored energy reserves. The swarming behavior of krill serves multiple purposes beyond simple feeding efficiency. Dense swarms provide protection from predators through the selfish herd effect. Individuals in the center of the swarm are less likely to be eaten than those on the edges. Swarms also create opportunities for reproduction, as males and females can more easily find each other in the vast ocean. The movements of krill swarms follow complex patterns influenced by ocean currents, food availability, and predator pressure. During the day, many krill species engage in vertical migration, descending to deeper waters to avoid visual predators and ascending to surface waters at night to feed. This daily movement of biomass between different ocean layers is one of the largest migrations on Earth. Arctic krill species, while smaller and less abundant than their Antarctic cousins, play equally important roles in northern polar ecosystems. Species like Thyssinoessa inermis and Thyssinoessa rashi form the dietary foundation for Arctic cod, seabirds, and marine mammals. Their life cycles are similarly adapted to the seasonal patterns of Arctic ice, with reproduction timed to coincide with peak food availability during the brief Arctic summer. The nutritional value of krill makes them incredibly important to polar food webs. They are rich in proteins, lipids, and essential fatty acids, making them an ideal food source for larger predators. Many polar species have evolved specialized feeding strategies specifically to exploit krill swarms. Baleen whales have filter feeding systems perfectly sized to capture krill, while seabirds like penguins and petrels can dive to intercept krill swarms at specific depths. Krill also play important ecological roles beyond serving as food. Their vertical migrations transport nutrients between different ocean layers, helping to maintain the productivity of polar waters. When krill feed at the surface and defecate at depth, they transport carbon and nutrients from the productive surface layers to the deep ocean, contributing to what scientists call the biological pump. The seasonal dynamics of krill populations drive the rhythms of entire polar ecosystems. During years when krill populations are high, predator populations often flourish. Penguin colonies raise more chicks, whale populations increase, and fish stocks expand. During years when krill populations crash, the effects ripple through the entire ecosystem, with predator populations declining and breeding failures occurring across multiple species. Climate change is already affecting krill populations in complex ways. Changes in sea ice extent and timing alter the availability of ice algae that serve as early season food sources. Warming temperatures affect the locations and timing of phytoplankton blooms that feed adult krill. Ocean acidification, caused by increased absorption of atmospheric carbon dioxide, may affect the ability of krill to build their calcium carbonate shells. The response of krill populations to environmental change varies by species and region. Some populations appear to be shifting their ranges poleward as waters warm, while others are experiencing changes in their seasonal timing of reproduction and growth. These changes have cascading effects throughout polar food webs, affecting everything from fish populations to whale migration patterns. Research on krill continues to reveal new aspects of their biology and ecology. Scientists have discovered that some krill species can live much longer than previously thought, with some individuals surviving for over 5 years in the harsh polar environment. Others have found that krill can actually shrink during periods of food scarcity, reducing their body size to conserve energy, a remarkable adaptation that allows them to survive extended periods of starvation. The acoustic properties of krill swarms have made them important subjects for marine research technology. Dense krill swarms create distinctive signatures on sonar that can be detected from great distances, allowing scientists to track swarm movements and estimate krill abundance across vast areas of the ocean. These techniques have revealed that krill distributions and movements are far more complex and dynamic than previously understood. In the absolute darkness of Antarctic winter, when temperatures plummet to -40 degrees Celsius and katabatic winds scream across the ice at over 200 kilometers per hour, one of nature's most remarkable gatherings takes place. Emperor penguins, the largest of all penguin species and perhaps the most extreme adapted birds on Earth, begin their annual breeding ritual in conditions that would kill most other animals within hours. Emperor penguins are living paradoxes. They choose to breed during the harshest season on the harshest continent on Earth, when other Antarctic wildlife has fled north to more temperate waters. While other penguin species breed during the relatively mild Antarctic summer, emperors have evolved to exploit the extreme winter conditions that no other species can tolerate. The emperor's breeding cycle is precisely timed to the Antarctic calendar. Adults arrive at breeding colonies in March and April, just as autumn turns to the endless night of polar winter. After a complex courtship ritual involving synchronized calls and displays, pairs mate and the female lays a single large egg in May or June, the beginning of Antarctic winter. What happens next defies belief. The female transfers the precious egg to the male and then departs for the ocean, leaving him to incubate it through the entire Antarctic winter. The male balances the egg on his feet, covered by a warm flap of skin called a brood pouch, and settles in for a 4-month fast in the most extreme conditions on Earth. During incubation, male emperors huddle together in groups that can number in the thousands. These huddles are constantly in motion, with birds on the outside gradually moving toward the center, while those in the warm interior eventually rotate to the periphery. The temperature in the center of a huddle can be over 30 degrees Celsius, warmer than the outside air. The difference between life and death in the Antarctic winter. The physiological adaptations that allow emperors to survive these conditions are remarkable. They have multiple layers of dense feathers, about 100 feathers per square inch, that trap warm air and provide insulation far superior to the best human winter gear. Their circulatory system includes countercurrent heat exchange, where warm arterial blood heats up cold venous blood, returning from their extremities, preventing heat loss and frostbite. Emperor penguins can slow their heart rate and metabolism dramatically during the worst weather, entering a state of controlled hypothermia that conserves energy. Their blood contains special proteins that prevent ice crystals from forming, similar to the antifreeze adaptations found in polar fish. They can also redirect blood flow away from non-essential organs to maintain the temperature of vital organs and their developing chick. The male's fast during incubation is one of the most extreme examples of parental sacrifice in the animal kingdom. Over the course of 4 months, males can lose up to 40% of their body weight, surviving entirely on stored fat reserves. They cannot leave the colony to feed because the egg would freeze and die within minutes in the Antarctic cold. When the chicks finally hatch in July and August, the depths of Antarctic winter, they are tiny and vulnerable, completely dependent on their fathers for warmth and food. Males feed newly hatched chicks with a protein-rich secretion from their esophagus, similar to crop milk produced by pigeons and doves. This ability to produce food internally is crucial, as there is no other food source available during the Antarctic winter. Timing is critical for emperor penguins. Females must return from their ocean feeding trips just as the chicks hatch, bringing food and taking over chick care so that the starving males can finally return to the sea. This synchronization requires precise navigation across hundreds of kilometers of featureless ice, often in complete darkness and blizzard conditions. Female emperors face their own challenges during the winter feeding season. They must travel across shifting sea ice to reach the ocean edge, sometimes walking over 100 kilometers each way. Once in the water, they dive to extraordinary depths in search of fish and squid. Emperors are the deepest diving birds in the world, capable of reaching depths of over 500 meters and staying underwater for more than 20 minutes. The diving abilities of emperor penguins rival those of marine mammals. Their bodies are perfectly streamlined for underwater flight, with powerful flippers that propel them through the water at speeds of up to 15 kilometers per hour. Their bones are solid rather than hollow like most birds, reducing buoyancy and helping them dive deeper. They can compress their lungs completely during deep dives, storing oxygen in their blood and muscles rather than their lungs. Emperor penguins have evolved sophisticated strategies for hunting beneath the ice. They can navigate in complete darkness using echolocation-like abilities, and their eyes are specially adapted for low-light vision underwater. They hunt primarily for Antarctic silverfish, squid, and krill, often diving under ice shelves where these prey species concentrate. The social structure of emperor penguin colonies is complex and dynamic. Breeding colonies can contain tens of thousands of individuals, creating logistical challenges for finding mates, maintaining territories, and caring for chicks in the chaos of a massive huddle. Emperors have evolved sophisticated vocal recognition abilities. Parents and chicks can identify each other by voice alone among thousands of other calling penguins. Chick rearing continues through the Antarctic spring and summer. As conditions moderate and daylight returns, both parents take turns feeding their rapidly growing offspring. Young emperors must grow large enough to survive on their own before the next winter arrives, a developmental race against time that takes nearly a year to complete. The molt is another challenging time for emperor penguins. Unlike other birds that molt gradually, emperors shed all their feathers at once in a process called catastrophic molt. During this 3-week period, they cannot enter the water and must fast again, losing up to 50% of their body weight. The molt typically occurs during summer when temperatures are more moderate, but it still represents a significant physiological challenge. Emperor penguins are also remarkable navigators. They can find their way back to specific breeding sites across hundreds of kilometers of seemingly featureless ice using a combination of visual landmarks, magnetic fields, and celestial navigation. Young emperors must learn these navigation skills before they can survive independently in the vast Antarctic landscape. The extreme specialization of emperor penguins for Antarctic conditions also makes them particularly vulnerable to environmental change. They depend on stable sea ice for breeding and accessing the ocean, but climate change is making Antarctic sea ice less predictable. Some breeding colonies have failed completely when sea ice broke up early, taking the entire colony with it into the ocean. Recent research has revealed new aspects of emperor penguin behavior and physiology. Scientists have discovered that emperors can enter a state similar to microsleep while standing upright in huddles, allowing them to rest while maintaining their position in the group. They have also found that emperor penguins can fast for even longer periods than previously known, with some individuals surviving without food for over 7 months during particularly harsh years. The study of emperor penguins has contributed significantly to our understanding of extreme animal physiology. Their adaptations for surviving in extreme cold, diving to great depths, and fasting for extended periods have informed research into human medicine and space exploration. The penguins' ability to prevent ice crystal formation in their blood has inspired research into better preservation techniques for human organs and tissues. In the icy waters beneath polar ice shelves, where sunlight has never penetrated and temperatures hover just above freezing, live some of the ocean's most extraordinary giants. These are not the massive whales that visit polar waters seasonally, but the permanent residents, creatures that have evolved to thrive in the constant cold and darkness of the deep polar seas. Their size, longevity, and bizarre adaptations make them among the most remarkable animals on Earth. The colossal squid, Mesonechotuthis hamiltoni, rules the deep waters around Antarctica as one of the ocean's most formidable predators. With eyes the size of dinner plates and tentacles armed with rotating hooks, these creatures can grow longer than a school bus and weigh over 500 kilograms. They represent the ultimate adaptation to polar deep-water hunting, evolved to pursue prey in the perpetual darkness beneath Antarctic ice. The enormous eyes of colossal squid are not mere curiosities. They are precision, instruments evolved for hunting in conditions where light is virtually non-existent. Each eye can be over 25 centimeters in diameter, larger than any other animal's eyes on Earth. These massive optical organs can detect the faintest bioluminescent flashes produced by prey animals, allowing the squid to hunt effectively in complete darkness. The tentacles of colossal squid are equipped with both suckers and sharp rotating hooks that can swivel 360 degrees. These hooks function like grappling devices, designed to grip struggling prey and prevent escape. The arrangement and size of these hooks vary along the length of each tentacle, creating a sophisticated capture system that can handle prey ranging from small fish to large Antarctic toothfish. Colossal squid have evolved remarkable physiological adaptations for life in frigid polar waters. Their blood contains copper-based hemocyanin instead of iron-based hemoglobin, which functions more efficiently than hemoglobin at low temperatures. They also produce antifreeze proteins similar to those found in polar fish, preventing ice crystal formation in their body fluids. The deep polar waters are also home to extraordinary sea spiders, pycnogonids that grow to sizes impossible in warmer waters. While sea spiders in temperate oceans rarely exceed a few centimeters, Antarctic species can have leg spans of over 70 centimeters. These giants move slowly across the sea floor on their 8 impossibly long legs, feeding on sponges, hydroids, and other sessile organisms. The gigantism of polar sea spiders results from the unique conditions of polar waters. Cold water holds more oxygen than warm water, allowing these creatures to grow larger without developing complex respiratory systems. Their slow metabolism and long lifespan also contribute to their impressive size. Some individuals may live for decades, growing continuously throughout their lives. Antarctic sea spiders have evolved bizarre reproductive strategies adapted to their extreme environment. In many species, the males carry developing eggs on specialized appendages, brooding them through the long polar winter when food is scarce and conditions are harsh. This male parental care is rare in arthropods, but makes sense in an environment where protecting developing offspring from the cold is crucial for reproductive success. The polar deep sea is also home to enormous starfish and sea urchins. The Antarctic sunstar, Labidiaster annulatus, can grow to over a meter in diameter and possesses up to 50 arms. These giants are voracious predators, capable of everting their stomachs to digest prey items larger than themselves. Their size allows them to tackle prey unavailable to smaller starfish, including other large echinoderms and even small fish. Sea urchins in polar waters grow to remarkable sizes, with some species reaching diameters of over 20 centimeters. The Antarctic sea urchin, Sterechinus neumeieri, can live for over 40 years, growing slowly but continuously in the frigid polar waters. These long-lived giants play important ecological roles as grazers, controlling the growth of encrusting organisms on hard substrates. The phenomenon of polar gigantism extends to many other groups of organisms. Polar amphipods, small crustaceans that in temperate waters rarely exceed a few millimeters, can grow to several centimeters in polar seas. Polar isopods, relatives of terrestrial pillbugs, can reach lengths of over 20 centimeters, making them giants compared to their tiny terrestrial cousins. Several factors contribute to polar gigantism. The high oxygen content of cold polar waters allows animals to grow larger without developing complex respiratory systems. The stable, cold environment reduces metabolic stress, allowing energy to be invested in growth rather than simply maintaining basic physiological functions. The seasonal abundance of food during polar summers provides the resources needed for growth, while the long polar winter gives organisms time to consolidate their gains. The deep polar benthos, the community of organisms living on and in the seafloor, represents one of Earth's most stable ecosystems. Unlike tropical environments that can be disrupted by storms or temperate regions that experience seasonal temperature fluctuations, the deep polar seafloor maintains nearly constant conditions year-round. This stability has allowed organisms to evolve highly specialized lifestyles and reach extreme sizes. Many polar giants are also incredibly long-lived. The Antarctic sponge, Scolimastra jubini, may be among the oldest animals on Earth, with some individuals estimated to be over 100 years old. These ancient organisms grow incredibly slowly, adding just millimeters to their size each year, but they can eventually reach enormous proportions. Their longevity means that individual sponges may have been filtering polar waters since before Columbus reached the Americas. The feeding strategies of polar giants are often highly specialized. Many rely on the seasonal pulses of food that rain down from the productive surface waters during the brief polar summer. They have evolved the ability to store energy efficiently and survive long periods of food scarcity. Some species can shut down their metabolism almost completely during winter, entering a state of near-suspended animation. The reproductive strategies of polar giants reflect the challenges of their environment. Many species have extended reproductive cycles, with some taking years to produce mature gametes. Others engage in brooding behavior, protecting their developing offspring through the harsh polar winter. Some species reproduce only once in their lifetimes, investing enormous amounts of energy in a single reproductive event. The predator-prey relationships among polar giants create some of the ocean's most dramatic encounters. Colossal squid battle sperm whales in the depths, leaving circular scars on whale skin from their rotating hooks. Giant starfish engulf and digest sea urchins in feeding events that can last for days. These interactions play out in slow motion in the frigid polar waters, but they represent some of the most intense predatory encounters in the ocean. The study of polar giants has revealed new insights into animal physiology and ecology. Their adaptations for surviving extreme cold, achieving remarkable size, and living extraordinarily long lives have implications for understanding aging, metabolic efficiency, and the limits of animal size. Some researchers believe that studying polar giants could provide insights into extending human lifespan and improving our ability to survive in extreme environments. Climate change poses unique threats to polar giants. Many of these species have evolved over millions of years in stable, cold environments. They cannot simply move to colder waters as their habitats warm, because they depend on the unique food webs and chemical conditions of polar seas. Their slow growth and reproduction mean that populations take decades or centuries to recover from disturbances, making them particularly vulnerable to rapid environmental change. Within the crystal lattice of sea ice itself exists a hidden world that challenges every assumption about where life can survive. This is the sea ice microbial community, a microscopic metropolis built within the brine channels and pockets that form when seawater freezes. Here, in spaces smaller than the width of a human hair, thrives an entire ecosystem of bacteria, algae, and protozoans that form the foundation of polar marine food webs. The creation of this microscopic habitat begins with the physics of freezing seawater. When ocean water starts to freeze, pure water forms ice crystals, while salt and other dissolved substances are excluded, creating a network of brine-filled channels throughout the ice. These channels can be incredibly small, some no wider than a few micrometers, but they remain liquid, even at temperatures well below the normal freezing point of water because of their high salt concentration. Sea ice algae are the primary producers of this microscopic ecosystem, photosynthetic organisms that have adapted to live within ice crystals themselves. During the brief polar spring, when sunlight begins to penetrate through the ice, these algae can multiply rapidly, creating blooms so dense they color the underside of ice floes brown and green. A single square meter of sea ice can contain billions of algal cells, creating productivity levels that rival tropical ecosystems. The dominant sea ice algae in Antarctic waters belong to the genus Nitzschia, diatoms that have evolved remarkable adaptations for life within ice crystals. These microscopic plants produce specialized proteins that help them adhere to ice surfaces and prevent them from being expelled as the ice continues to freeze. They can also produce their own antifreeze compounds, allowing their cellular machinery to function at temperatures that would kill other algae. The photosynthetic process in sea ice algae operates under extreme constraints. Light levels within sea ice are typically less than 1% of surface levels, requiring these organisms to maximize their photosynthetic efficiency. Many species have evolved enhanced light harvesting complexes and can perform photosynthesis at light levels that would be insufficient for most other algae. The timing of sea ice algal blooms is precisely coordinated with the polar seasons. As spring arrives and light levels increase, algae within the ice begin rapid multiplication. This bloom often occurs weeks or even months before open water phytoplankton blooms develop, providing crucial early season food for polar marine ecosystems when other food sources are scarce. Sea ice bacteria play equally important roles in this microscopic ecosystem. These prokaryotic organisms have adapted to survive in conditions that combine extreme cold, high salinity, and limited nutrients. Some species are psychrophilic, cold-loving organisms that not only tolerate low temperatures, but actually require them for optimal growth. Their enzymes have been modified to function efficiently at temperatures that would denature the proteins of mesophilic organisms. The bacterial communities within sea ice are remarkably diverse, with hundreds of species coexisting in the tiny brine channels. Some are primary producers, using chemosynthesis to convert inorganic compounds into organic matter. Others are decomposers, breaking down organic material and recycling nutrients within the ice ecosystem. Still others are predators, feeding on smaller bacteria and algae in microscopic food webs that mirror the complexity of larger ecosystems. One of the most remarkable aspects of sea ice microbial communities is their ability to remain active at temperatures as low as -20 degrees Celsius. At these temperatures, the brine channels become so concentrated with salt that they resemble biological antifreeze solutions. The organisms living within them have evolved specialized membranes that remain flexible at these extreme temperatures and enzymes that continue to function when most biological processes would stop. Protozoans within sea ice represent some of the most specialized, single-celled organisms on Earth. These microscopic predators have evolved to hunt and consume bacteria and algae within the confined spaces of brine channels. Some species can change their shape dramatically to squeeze through narrow ice channels, while others produce specialized feeding structures adapted for capturing prey in the viscous high-salinity environment of sea ice brine. The sea ice microbial community creates its own microclimate within the ice. Metabolic processes generate heat and chemical byproducts that can modify the local environment. Some organisms produce extracellular polymeric substances, biological glues that help stabilize the ice structure and create favorable microhabitats for other species. Seasonal dynamics drive dramatic changes in sea ice microbial communities. During winter, when light is absent and temperatures are at their lowest, many organisms enter a state of dormancy or extremely reduced activity. They survive on stored energy reserves or switch to alternative metabolic pathways that don't require light. As conditions improve in spring, the community explodes into activity with rapid cell division and intense competition for resources. The role of sea ice microbes extends far beyond their immediate habitat. When sea ice melts, these organisms are released into the water column, where they seed phytoplankton blooms and provide food for larger organisms. This process creates a biological link between the ice ecosystem and the open ocean, transferring energy and nutrients between these different environments. Sea ice microbial communities also play important roles in global biogeochemical cycles. They process significant amounts of carbon, nitrogen, and other elements, influencing the chemical composition of polar waters. Some species produce dimethyl sulfide, a compound that can affect cloud formation and regional climate patterns when it reaches the atmosphere. The study of sea ice microbes has revealed organisms with remarkable biotechnological potential. Cold-adapted enzymes from sea ice bacteria are being investigated for use in industrial processes that require low-temperature activity. Antifreeze proteins from sea ice organisms are being studied for applications in food preservation, organ transplantation, and other medical applications. The vertical structure of sea ice creates distinct microbial zones, each with its own characteristic community. Near the top of the ice, where temperatures are coldest and salinity highest, only the most extreme specialists can survive. In the middle layers, more diverse communities develop as conditions moderate. At the ice-water interface, the richest and most productive communities flourish, taking advantage of nutrients from both the ice and underlying water. The interaction between sea ice microbes and their physical environment is remarkably dynamic. As ice warms and cools, brine channels expand and contract, potentially concentrating or diluting the organisms within them. The microbes respond to these changes by adjusting their physiology or moving within the ice matrix to find more favorable conditions. Some sea ice microbes have evolved symbiotic relationships that help them survive extreme conditions. Certain algae harbor bacterial partners that provide essential nutrients or protection from environmental stress. These partnerships represent some of the most intimate biological relationships on Earth, with partners literally living inside each other's cells. The reproductive strategies of sea ice microbes are adapted to the boom and bust cycles of polar seasons. Many species can reproduce rapidly when conditions are favorable, creating massive population blooms in short periods. Others produce resistant spores or cysts that can survive harsh conditions and germinate when the environment improves. Recent research has revealed that sea ice microbial communities can actively modify their environment to improve survival conditions. Some organisms produce compounds that lower the freezing point of brine, effectively creating larger living spaces within the ice. Others produce light-scattering particles that can increase the amount of light available for photosynthesis in deeper ice layers. The microscopic metropolis within sea ice represents one of Earth's most extreme ecosystems, where life has found ways to thrive in conditions that seem impossible. These tiny organisms, invisible to the naked eye, form the foundation of polar marine ecosystems and play crucial roles in global climate regulation. Their study continues to reveal new insights into the limits of life and the remarkable adaptability of organisms to extreme environments. Climate change is already affecting sea ice microbial communities in complex ways. Changes in sea ice extent, thickness, and seasonal timing alter the habitat available for these organisms. Warming temperatures may favor some species while eliminating others, potentially restructuring these communities in ways that could cascade through entire polar ecosystems. At the dynamic boundary where ice meets open water, a group of remarkable marine mammals has evolved to become the apex predators of polar seas. Seals, perfectly adapted for life in both aquatic and icy environments, serve as sentinels of the ice edge, their lives intimately connected to the seasonal rhythms of polar ice formation and retreat. These streamlined carnivores represent some of evolution's most successful solutions to the challenges of hunting in frigid waters while maintaining the ability to rest and breed on ice. The Weddell seal of Antarctica exemplifies the extraordinary adaptations required for life in the world's most extreme marine environment. These robust seals can dive deeper and hold their breath longer than almost any other mammal, regularly descending to depths of over 600 meters and staying submerged for more than an hour. Their diving abilities allow them to exploit food resources in the deep waters beneath Antarctic ice shelves, where few other predators can venture. The physiological adaptations that enable such extreme diving performance are remarkable. Weddell seals can store enormous amounts of oxygen in their blood and muscles, with oxygen storage capacity per unit body weight far exceeding that of terrestrial mammals. During deep dives, they can shut down circulation to non-essential organs, redirecting oxygenated blood only to the brain and heart. Their heart rate can drop to just a few beats per minute, conserving oxygen for extended underwater hunts. Perhaps most remarkably, Weddell seals maintain breathing holes in sea ice by using their teeth to rasp away ice that continuously forms over their access points. This behavior allows them to live year-round in areas covered by solid ice, accessing the ocean through holes they maintain through constant tooth-wearing effort. Some individuals maintain multiple breathing holes across territories spanning several kilometers, creating an underwater highway system beneath the ice. Leopard seals represent the ultimate polar predator, combining the diving abilities of other seals with the hunting prowess of apex carnivores. These sleek, spotted hunters patrol the ice edges of Antarctica, preying on everything from krill to penguins to other seals. Their massive jaws contain teeth adapted for both filter feeding on small prey and tearing apart larger victims, making them remarkably versatile predators. The hunting strategies of leopard seals demonstrate remarkable intelligence and adaptability. When targeting penguins, they often wait beneath ice edges where penguins enter the water, using stealth and explosive speed to capture their prey. They have been observed playing with captured penguins, apparently learning to remove the skin before consumption. When feeding on krill, they use their teeth as filters, taking in massive mouthfuls of krill swarms and expelling the water while retaining the tiny crustaceans. In the Arctic, ringed seals have evolved different but equally impressive adaptations. These small seals create elaborate layer systems in the snow above their breathing holes, providing protected spaces for giving birth and raising pups on the sea ice. The construction of these snow caves requires remarkable engineering skills, as the structures must be strong enough to support heavy snow loads while providing ventilation and escape routes. The reproductive strategies of polar seals are precisely timed to the seasonal ice cycles. Most species give birth during late winter or early spring, when ice conditions are most stable. Seal pups are born with thick fur or blubber layers that provide insulation in the frigid polar environment. Many species produce extremely rich milk. Seal milk can contain over 50% fat, allowing pups to grow rapidly and develop the blubber layers necessary for survival. Bearded seals of the Arctic have evolved specialized feeding adaptations for life on the seafloor beneath sea ice. Their sensitive whiskers, or vibrissae, can detect the movements of bottom-dwelling prey in the muddy sediments of shallow Arctic seas. These whiskers are so sensitive, they can identify different types of prey by touch alone, allowing bearded seals to feed effectively in the dark waters beneath ice cover. The social structures of polar seals vary dramatically among species, often reflecting different adaptations to ice environments. Some species, like harbor seals in Arctic regions, form large aggregations on ice floes, providing safety in numbers and opportunities for social learning. Others, like Weddell seals, are more territorial, with individuals defending underwater territories around their breathing holes. The molting process in polar seals presents unique challenges. Unlike seals in temperate waters that can haul out on beaches, polar seals must molt while maintaining access to their breathing holes or ice edge habitats. Some species undergo catastrophic molts, shedding large patches of fur and skin simultaneously while fasting on ice floes. This process can last several weeks and requires significant energy reserves. Polar seals play crucial roles as apex predators in their ecosystems. They consume enormous quantities of fish, squid, and krill, helping to structure polar marine food webs. Their diving activities also contribute to mixing water masses, as their movements through the water column can transport nutrients and organisms between different depths. The sensory adaptations of polar seals are remarkable. Their vision is adapted for both bright surface conditions and the dim light beneath ice. Many species have enhanced underwater hearing that allows them to communicate over long distances through ice and water. Some seals can echolocate, using sound to navigate and locate prey in the dark waters beneath ice cover. The relationship between polar seals and sea ice is so intimate that changes in ice conditions directly affect seal populations. Species that depend on stable ice for breeding, like ringed seals, are particularly vulnerable to changes in ice extent and timing. The loss of sea ice habitat can force seals to travel greater distances to find suitable breeding sites, increasing energy costs and reducing reproductive success. Recent research has revealed new aspects of polar seal behavior and physiology. Scientists have discovered that some seals can enter a state similar to suspended animation during extreme weather, slowing their metabolism to conserve energy. Others have found that seals can navigate over vast distances beneath ice, possibly using magnetic fields or other cues to find their breathing holes. The study of polar seal diving physiology has contributed significantly to human medicine and technology. Understanding how seals manage oxygen during extended dives has informed research into treating human diving disorders and developing better diving equipment. The seal's ability to prevent decompression sickness during rapid ascents from great depths has applications for human diving safety. Polar seals also serve as important indicators of ecosystem health. Changes in seal populations, body condition, and reproductive success can signal broader changes in polar marine ecosystems. Scientists monitor seal populations to track the effects of climate change, pollution, and other environmental stresses on polar environments. The hunting skills of polar seals continue to amaze researchers. Some species have been observed using tools such as rocks or ice chunks to break open shellfish. Others have learned to exploit human activities, following fishing boats or congregating near research stations where food scraps are available. These behaviors demonstrate remarkable intelligence and adaptability. The communication systems of polar seals are adapted to their icy environment. Many species produce calls that can travel long distances through water and ice, allowing individuals to maintain contact even when separated by kilometers of ice. Some calls are so low in frequency they can travel for tens of kilometers beneath the ice, creating an acoustic network that connects seals across vast areas. The future of polar seals is closely tied to the fate of sea ice. As climate change alters the extent, thickness, and seasonal patterns of polar ice, it fundamentally changes the habitat available to these specialized predators. Some species may adapt by shifting their ranges or modifying their behavior, but others face an uncertain future in a rapidly warming world where the ice edge, their ancestral home, becomes increasingly unpredictable. In the deepest, darkest waters beneath polar ice shelves, where the pressure would crush surface dwellers and temperatures hover just above freezing, live some of the ocean's most extraordinary architects. These are the sessile organisms, sponges, corals, and other creatures that have built complex three-dimensional structures in places where sunlight has never penetrated. Their slow-growing, ancient communities create underwater cities that rival tropical coral reefs in their complexity and biodiversity. Antarctic glass sponges represent perhaps the most remarkable examples of these deep polar architects. These ethereally beautiful creatures build their skeletons from silica, creating intricate glass-like structures that can tower several meters above the seafloor. Individual specimens can live for over 1,000 years, growing so slowly that their annual growth is measured in millimeters. Some sponge fields in Antarctic waters contain structures that began growing before human civilization developed agriculture. The construction techniques of glass sponges are marvels of biological engineering. They extract dissolved silica from seawater and use specialized cells called sclerocytes to deposit it in precise patterns, creating spicules, needle-like structures that form the sponge's skeleton. These spicules can be straight, curved, or elaborately branched, and they interlock to create frameworks of remarkable strength and beauty. The deep polar sponge gardens serve as apartment complexes for countless other organisms. Fish shelter within the protective framework of sponge skeletons, while invertebrates attach to sponge surfaces or live within the sponge tissue itself. Some relationships are so intimate that certain species of fish and invertebrates are found nowhere else except in association with specific sponge species. Cold water corals also thrive in polar deep waters, building reefs in conditions vastly different from their tropical cousins. Unlike tropical corals that depend on symbiotic algae for nutrition, cold water corals are entirely dependent on capturing food from the water column. They have evolved enhanced feeding structures and can survive in the eternal darkness of the deep polar seas. The reef-building cold water corals of polar regions, primarily species of Lophelia and Desmophyllum, create structures that can extend for kilometers across the sea floor. These coral reefs develop incredibly slowly, with individual coral colonies growing only a few millimeters per year. The largest cold water coral reefs may have taken tens of thousands of years to reach their current size. The feeding strategies of deep polar architects are perfectly adapted to their food-poor environments. Most rely on marine snow, the constant rain of organic particles that drifts down from the productive surface waters. They have evolved highly efficient filtering systems that can capture even the smallest food particles from the sparse food supply. Some species can also feed on dissolved organic matter, extracting nutrition directly from the water. Bryozoans, sometimes called moss animals, create delicate, lace-like colonies that encrust surfaces throughout the polar deep sea. These colonial animals filter feed using tiny tentacles, creating water currents that bring food particles to their mouths. Their colonies can cover large areas of the seafloor, creating habitat for other organisms while processing enormous volumes of water. The temporal scales on which polar deep-sea architecture develops are almost incomprehensible. While tropical coral reefs can grow measurably in a human lifetime, polar deep-sea communities develop over geological timescales. The oldest sponge reefs in Antarctic waters may have begun growing during the last ice age, their growth spanning the entire history of human civilization. These slow growth rates are a consequence of the extreme conditions in polar deep waters. Cold temperatures slow all biological processes, while limited food availability means organisms must invest their energy carefully. The payoff for this slow growth strategy is remarkable longevity and the ability to create stable, complex habitats that persist for millennia. The reproductive strategies of polar and deep-sea architects reflect their challenging environment. Many species are hermaphroditic, able to reproduce with any compatible individual they encounter in the sparse, deep-sea environment. Others can reproduce asexually, creating clones of themselves when sexual reproduction is not possible. Some species package their larvae with energy-rich yolk supplies that allow them to develop for extended periods before needing to find food. The water flow patterns around polar deep-sea structures create unique microenvironments. Large sponges and coral colonies modify local current patterns, creating areas of increased or decreased flow that are exploited by different species. These current modifications can enhance food delivery to filter-feeding organisms while providing sheltered areas for more delicate species. The chemical environments created by polar deep-sea architects can be dramatically different from the surrounding water. Large sponges can modify the chemistry of water flowing through their tissues, while coral reefs can create pH gradients and localized areas of enhanced or depleted nutrients. These chemical modifications create additional niches for specialized organisms. The structural complexity created by polar deep-sea architects provides crucial habitat in otherwise barren environments. The three-dimensional structures created by sponges and corals increase the available surface area for colonization by orders of magnitude. A single large sponge can provide habitat equivalent to several square meters of seafloor, supporting diverse communities of associated organisms. The study of polar deep-sea architecture has revealed remarkable examples of convergent evolution. Despite being separated by vast distances and different evolutionary histories, deep-sea communities in the Arctic and Antarctic often show similar architectural patterns and ecological functions. This suggests that the extreme conditions of polar deep waters impose similar constraints that lead to similar solutions. The feeding ecology of polar deep-sea architectural communities is remarkably complex. While primary production occurs thousands of meters above in the sunlit surface waters, these deep communities are ultimately supported by the rain of organic matter from above. The timing and quantity of this food supply can vary dramatically with seasonal cycles of surface productivity. Bioturbation, the mixing of sediments by organisms, is minimal in polar deep-sea environments, allowing the delicate structures built by sessile organisms to persist for extremely long periods. In contrast to shallow water environments, where storms and bioturbation constantly reshape habitats, polar deep-sea structures can remain essentially unchanged for decades or centuries. The role of polar deep-sea architects in global carbon cycling is significant but poorly understood. These organisms extract carbon from seawater to build their skeletons and tissues, potentially sequestering carbon in their slow-growing structures for centuries or millennia. When they die, their skeletons can form carbonate or silicate deposits on the seafloor, representing long-term carbon storage. Recent discoveries have revealed that some polar deep-sea architectural species are far more widespread than previously thought. Advanced genetic techniques have shown that some sponge and coral species occur in both Arctic and Antarctic waters, despite the vast distances between these polar regions. These discoveries suggest that polar deep-sea communities may be connected by ancient dispersal routes, or that some species have remarkable dispersal abilities. The vulnerability of polar deep-sea architectural communities to disturbance is extreme. Because of their slow growth rates, these communities can take centuries to recover from physical damage. Bottom fishing, cable laying, or other human activities can destroy community structures that took millennia to develop. Climate change poses additional threats, as changing temperatures and ocean chemistry can affect the ability of these organisms to build and maintain their skeletal structures. The biotechnological potential of polar deep-sea architects is beginning to be recognized. The unique biochemistry required to build structures in extreme cold and high pressure has evolved novel compounds and processes that could have applications in materials science, medicine, and other fields. The silica structures of glass sponges, for example, are being studied as models for creating new materials with unique optical and mechanical properties. The discovery and study of polar deep-sea architectural communities is ongoing, with new species and habitats being discovered regularly. Advanced submersible technology and remote sensing techniques continue to reveal the extent and complexity of these deep polar ecosystems. Each new discovery adds to our understanding of how life can create complex, stable communities in some of Earth's most extreme environments. Beneath the frozen surface of polar seas flows a vast network of ocean currents that connects the polar regions to every corner of the Earth's oceans. These great currents, driven by temperature differences, salinity gradients, and the rotation of the planet, transport not only water but also heat, nutrients, and life itself across the globe. The polar oceans serve as the engines of the global ocean circulation system, generating currents that influence weather patterns, climate stability, and marine ecosystems thousands of kilometers away. The Antarctic Circumpolar Current represents the largest current system on Earth, carrying more water than all the world's rivers combined. This massive current circles Antarctica, connecting the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans in an unbroken ring of flowing water. With a transport of over 130 million cubic meters per second, it moves a volume of water equivalent to 600 Amazon rivers, making it the most powerful current system on the planet. The formation of Antarctic deep water represents one of the most important processes in global ocean circulation. Around Antarctica, cold surface waters become extremely dense due to low temperatures and high salt concentrations from sea ice formation. This dense water sinks to the ocean floor and spreads northward into all the world's ocean basins, forming the bottom layer of the global ocean. This process, known as thermohaline circulation, drives what scientists call the global conveyor belt of ocean circulation. The creation of Antarctic deep water begins with the formation of sea ice. As seawater freezes, salt is excluded from the ice crystals and concentrates in the remaining liquid water. This cold, salty water becomes so dense that it sinks to the bottom of the ocean, carrying with it dissolved gases, nutrients, and microscopic organisms from the surface. The sinking water creates a vertical circulation that brings nutrients from the depths to the surface, fueling the productivity of polar marine ecosystems. In the Arctic, a different but equally important circulation pattern develops. The Arctic Ocean is largely enclosed by land, creating a circulation system dominated by the interaction between Atlantic and Pacific water masses. Warm, salty Atlantic water flows northward into the Arctic, while colder, fresher Pacific water enters through the Bering Strait. The mixing of these water masses and their interaction with sea ice creates complex circulation patterns that influence climate throughout the Northern Hemisphere. The Beaufort Gyre in the Arctic Ocean represents one of the most stable circulation features on Earth. This clockwise rotating system of currents and sea ice has persisted for decades, accumulating fresh water from rivers and sea ice melt. The gyre acts as a massive reservoir of fresh water, storing it for years before releasing it into the North Atlantic. Changes in the strength or position of the Beaufort Gyre can affect ocean circulation patterns across the entire Atlantic basin. The seasonal cycles of polar currents create dramatic changes in ocean conditions. During summer, increased meltwater from ice and glaciers can create strong freshwater pulses that affect density stratification and current patterns. These seasonal changes can alter the distribution of nutrients, affecting the timing and location of phytoplankton blooms and cascading through entire marine food webs. The interaction between currents and topography creates unique oceanographic features in polar waters. Underwater ridges and seamounts can deflect and accelerate currents, creating areas of enhanced mixing and upwelling. The Drake Passage, the narrow waterway between South America and Antarctica, acts as a constriction that accelerates the Antarctic Circumpolar Current and creates some of the most turbulent waters on Earth. Upwelling and downwelling processes in polar waters are crucial for marine productivity. Areas where deep waters rise to the surface bring nutrients from the depths, creating oases of productivity in otherwise nutrient-poor polar waters. Conversely, areas where surface waters sink carry oxygen and surface-derived nutrients to the deep ocean, supporting deep-sea ecosystems. The transport of larvae and juvenile organisms by polar currents creates connections between distant marine ecosystems. Many polar species have planktonic larval stages that can survive in the water column for weeks or months, allowing them to be carried hundreds or thousands of kilometers by ocean currents. This larval transport maintains genetic connectivity between populations and allows species to colonize new habitats. The chemical properties of polar currents have global implications for ocean chemistry. The cold polar waters can dissolve more carbon dioxide than warmer waters, making polar oceans important sinks for atmospheric CO2. The deep waters formed in polar regions carry this dissolved carbon to the depths of all ocean basins, representing a major component of the global carbon cycle. The interaction between currents and sea ice creates complex feedback systems that influence both local and global climate. Sea ice formation releases salt into the underlying water, increasing its density and driving circulation. Conversely, changes in circulation patterns can affect the distribution and thickness of sea ice, altering its ability to reflect solar radiation and insulate the ocean from atmospheric temperatures. Frontal zones, where different water masses meet, are areas of enhanced biological activity in polar oceans. The Antarctic polar front, where cold Antarctic water meets warmer sub-Antarctic water, creates one of the most productive regions in the Southern Ocean. The mixing of different water masses brings nutrients to the surface and creates conditions favorable for phytoplankton growth. The deep currents originating in polar regions carry more than just water. They transport dissolved nutrients, trace elements, and even microscopic organisms to the far reaches of the global ocean. These deep currents can take decades or centuries to circulate through the world's oceans, creating connections between polar regions and tropical ecosystems that operate on timescales far longer than human lifespans. The study of polar currents has revealed the remarkable stability of some circulation patterns and the surprising variability of others. While major current systems, like the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, have persisted for millions of years, smaller-scale circulation features can change rapidly in response to atmospheric conditions, sea ice distributions, and other factors. The role of wind in driving polar currents cannot be underestimated. The Southern Ocean experiences some of the strongest and most persistent winds on Earth, driving the Antarctic Circumpolar Current and creating the massive waves that make these waters notoriously dangerous for ships. In the Arctic, changing wind patterns associated with climate change are altering ice drift patterns and current systems. The interaction between polar currents and marine life creates remarkable examples of adaptation and evolution. Some organisms have evolved to exploit specific current systems, timing their reproduction to coincide with favorable current conditions that will transport their offspring to suitable habitats. Others have evolved strong swimming abilities to maintain their position against strong currents. Recent research has revealed that polar current systems are more variable and complex than previously understood. Advanced oceanographic instruments and satellite technology have shown that currents can change rapidly in response to weather patterns, sea ice conditions, and other factors. This variability has important implications for marine ecosystems and global climate patterns. The future of polar current systems in a changing climate is a subject of intense scientific interest. As polar ice melts and ocean temperatures change, the density differences that drive thermohaline circulation may weaken, potentially slowing or altering the global ocean conveyor belt. Such changes could have profound implications for climate stability and marine ecosystems worldwide. Climate models predict that changes in polar current systems could affect everything from European weather patterns to monsoon systems in Asia and Africa. The interconnectedness of global ocean circulation means that changes in polar waters can have far-reaching consequences for marine ecosystems and human societies around the world. Understanding and monitoring these current systems is crucial for predicting and adapting to future climate change. At the base of every polar marine food web lies an invisible foundation that supports all higher life in these extreme environments. The microscopic phytoplankton of polar waters, single-celled algae smaller than the width of a human hair, are among the most productive organisms on Earth. These tiny photosynthetic cells have evolved remarkable adaptations that allow them to thrive in conditions where most plants cannot survive, creating the biological basis for some of the planet's most abundant wildlife populations. Polar phytoplankton face challenges that would be impossible for terrestrial plants to overcome. They must photosynthesize in waters where temperatures can drop below freezing, where ice cover blocks sunlight for months at a time, and where nutrients may be scarce or locked away in deep waters. Yet these microscopic organisms have not merely survived in polar waters, they have created some of the most productive marine ecosystems on Earth. The timing of phytoplankton blooms in polar waters is precisely synchronized with seasonal changes in light and ice cover. As spring arrives and sea ice begins to retreat, the combination of increasing daylight and stable water conditions creates perfect conditions for explosive phytoplankton growth. These spring blooms can be so massive they are visible from space, turning vast areas of polar oceans green and blue-green as billions of microscopic cells multiply. Diatoms dominate many polar phytoplankton communities, their intricate glass houses providing both protection and structural support in the turbulent polar waters. These single-celled algae build their cell walls from silica, creating elaborate geometric patterns that rival the most complex human artwork. Each species has its own unique pattern of holes, ridges, and ornamentations that serve specific functions in light capture, nutrient uptake, and protection from grazers. The chain-forming diatoms of polar waters create some of nature's most elegant structures. Species like Chaetoceros socialis link together in long, spiral chains that can stretch for meters through the water column. These chains increase the surface area available for a photosynthesis while reducing sinking rates, allowing the cells to remain in the photic zone where light is available for photosynthesis. Polar phytoplankton have evolved sophisticated strategies for dealing with extreme light conditions. During the polar summer, they must cope with 24 hours of continuous sunlight, including potentially damaging ultraviolet radiation reflected from ice and snow. Many species produce protective pigments and compounds that screen out harmful radiation while maximizing the capture of useful light for photosynthesis. The nutrient cycling strategies of polar phytoplankton are adapted to the boom and bust nature of polar ecosystems. During summer blooms, they can rapidly deplete surface nutrients, but many species have evolved the ability to store excess nutrients internally during times of abundance. This storage allows them to continue growing even when external nutrient concentrations become limiting. Flagellated phytoplankton in polar waters possess remarkable swimming abilities that allow them to navigate the complex three-dimensional environment beneath sea ice. These microscopic cells can swim toward light sources, away from areas of high salinity, or toward patches of nutrients. Some species can even detect and swim toward the underside of sea ice, where they form dense accumulations that serve as the first food source for many polar marine animals. The cold water adaptations of polar phytoplankton extend to their fundamental cellular machinery. Their enzymes have been modified to function efficiently at low temperatures. Their membranes remain flexible in frigid water, and their metabolic pathways are optimized for the slow pace of life in cold environments. These adaptations allow them to photosynthesize and grow at temperatures that would shut down the cellular processes of warm water species. The role of iron in limiting polar phytoplankton growth has revealed the global interconnectedness of Earth's systems. Much of the iron that fertilizes polar phytoplankton blooms comes from dust blown from distant continents, sometimes traveling thousands of kilometers before settling in polar waters. Changes in wind patterns, desertification, or land use in far distant regions can therefore affect the productivity of polar marine ecosystems. Coccolithophores, phytoplankton that build elaborate calcium carbonate plates, play important roles in polar carbon cycling. These organisms extract carbon dioxide from seawater to build their calcite shells, potentially removing significant amounts of carbon from the atmosphere. When they die, their shells can sink to the deep ocean, representing a long-term carbon storage mechanism. The symbiotic relationships between some polar phytoplankton and bacteria reveal the complex interdependencies that exist even at the microscopic level. Some algae harbor bacterial partners that provide essential vitamins or nutrients in exchange for organic compounds produced by photosynthesis. These partnerships allow both organisms to survive in conditions where neither could exist alone. The seasonal succession of phytoplankton species in polar waters creates distinct phases in ecosystem productivity. Early spring blooms may be dominated by small, flagellated species that can begin growing under the ice, followed by large diatom blooms as ice retreats and mixing increases. Late summer communities may be dominated by different species adapted to nutrient-depleted conditions. The response of polar phytoplankton to changes in sea ice is complex and species-specific. Some species depend on the stable, stratified conditions that develop when ice melts, while others thrive in the turbulent mixing that occurs in ice-free waters. Changes in the timing, extent, or thickness of sea ice can therefore dramatically alter phytoplankton community composition and productivity. The production of dimethyl sulfide by certain polar phytoplankton species has implications for global climate regulation. This sulfur compound, when released to the atmosphere, can serve as condensation nuclei for cloud formation, potentially affecting regional weather patterns. The feedback between phytoplankton productivity, DMS production, and cloud formation represents one of the ways that marine life influences global climate. Polar phytoplankton blooms create underwater snowstorms as dead and dying cells aggregate and sink toward the seafloor. This marine snow provides food for deep-sea organisms and transports carbon from the surface to the deep ocean. The timing and magnitude of these sinking events can significantly impact the communities of organisms living in the deep polar seas. The toxic compounds produced by some polar phytoplankton species serve as chemical defenses against grazers. These toxins can accumulate in the food chain, sometimes reaching concentrations that affect higher predators. Understanding the production and effects of these natural toxins is important for assessing the health of polar marine ecosystems. The genetic diversity within polar phytoplankton populations is remarkable, with individual species often containing numerous genetically distinct populations adapted to specific local conditions. This genetic diversity provides resilience against environmental change and allows species to adapt to new conditions as polar environments continue to evolve. Recent research has revealed that some polar phytoplankton species can switch between different metabolic modes depending on environmental conditions. During periods when light is limiting, some species can obtain energy from organic compounds rather than photosynthesis, essentially becoming temporary heterotrophs. This metabolic flexibility allows them to survive extended periods of darkness beneath thick ice cover. The study of polar phytoplankton continues to reveal new species and new adaptations. Many polar regions remain underexplored, and each research expedition often discovers new phytoplankton species or previously unknown adaptations. These discoveries expand our understanding of how life can adapt to extreme conditions and provide insights into the limits of photosynthetic life on Earth. Climate change is already affecting polar phytoplankton communities in complex ways. Changes in ice cover, temperature, and nutrient availability are altering the timing and composition of phytoplankton blooms. Some species are shifting their ranges poleward, while others are experiencing changes in their seasonal growth patterns. These changes in the invisible foundation of polar ecosystems have cascading effects throughout the entire food web, affecting everything from krill populations to whale migration patterns. The frozen kingdoms of our planet serve a role far greater than simply providing habitat for specialized wildlife. These vast expanses of ice and frigid water function as Earth's primary climate regulation system, a planetary air conditioning unit that influences weather patterns, ocean circulation, and atmospheric composition across the globe. The polar regions are not isolated frozen wastelands. They are the beating heart of our planet's climate system. The albedo effect of polar ice represents one of the most fundamental ways these regions regulate global temperature. Fresh snow and ice reflect up to 90% of incoming solar radiation back to space, while dark ocean water absorbs up to 90% of the same radiation. This dramatic difference in reflectivity means that polar ice serves as a massive mirror, bouncing solar energy away from Earth and helping to maintain the planet's energy balance. The seasonal cycle of ice formation and melting creates a dynamic feedback system that amplifies or moderates climate changes. During winter, expanding ice cover increases the planet's reflectivity, reducing the absorption of solar energy. During summer, retreating ice exposes darker surfaces that absorb more heat, accelerating further warming and ice loss. This ice albedo feedback is one of the reasons why polar regions are experiencing more rapid warming than other parts of the planet. The formation of sea ice is itself a climate regulation mechanism of enormous importance. When seawater freezes, it releases salt into the underlying water, making it denser and causing it to sink. This process drives the thermohaline circulation that creates deep ocean currents, transporting heat and nutrients around the globe. The deep water formed in polar regions takes centuries to circulate through the world's oceans, making polar processes crucial for long-term climate stability. The vast ice sheets of Antarctica and Greenland store enormous amounts of water that would otherwise contribute to sea level rise. The Antarctic ice sheet alone contains enough water to raise global sea levels by nearly 60 meters if it melted completely. These ice sheets act as massive reservoirs, storing precipitation as ice for thousands of years before releasing it slowly through glacial flow and melting. The seasonal exchange of carbon dioxide between polar oceans and the atmosphere plays a crucial role in regulating atmospheric CO2 concentrations. Cold polar waters can dissolve more carbon dioxide than warm waters, making polar oceans important carbon sinks. During winter, when biological productivity is low, polar waters absorb CO2 from the atmosphere. During summer, photosynthesis by phytoplankton removes additional CO2 from the water, allowing more atmospheric CO2 to dissolve. The biological pump in polar waters represents another important climate regulation mechanism. Phytoplankton in polar waters fix atmospheric carbon dioxide through photosynthesis. And when these organisms die, many sink to the deep ocean, effectively removing carbon from the atmosphere for decades or centuries. The seasonal phytoplankton blooms in polar waters process enormous amounts of carbon, making these regions crucial for global carbon cycling. The production of cloud condensation nuclei by polar marine organisms influences cloud formation and regional weather patterns. Many polar phytoplankton species produce dimethyl sulfide and other compounds that, when released to the atmosphere, serve as seeds for cloud formation. Clouds formed over polar regions can affect local temperature and precipitation patterns, creating complex feedbacks between marine biology and regional climate. The insulating effect of sea ice on underlying ocean water helps maintain the temperature difference between polar and tropical regions that drives global atmospheric circulation patterns. The temperature gradient between poles and equator creates the pressure differences that drive wind patterns, storm systems, and the general circulation of the atmosphere. Changes in polar temperatures can therefore affect weather patterns thousands of kilometers away. The timing of seasonal ice formation and melting influences the timing of weather patterns across much of the globe. The jet stream, a high-altitude river of air that guides weather systems across continents, is influenced by the temperature contrast between polar and temperate regions. Changes in polar temperatures can cause the jet stream to shift, bringing unusual weather patterns to regions far from the poles. Polar regions also regulate global sea level through their massive ice storage capacity. The ice sheets and glaciers of Antarctica, Greenland, and the Arctic contain the vast majority of the world's freshwater ice. The balance between accumulation of snow and ice in these regions and their melting or calving into the ocean directly determines global sea level. The deep water formation in polar regions creates a global conveyor belt of ocean circulation that transports heat from tropical to polar regions. Warm surface currents carry heat poleward, where the water cools and sinks, creating deep currents that flow toward the equator. This circulation system, known as the meridional overturning circulation, helps moderate global temperatures by distributing heat around the planet. The seasonal timing of biological processes in polar regions affects global biogeochemical cycles. The massive spring phytoplankton blooms in polar waters represent one of the largest seasonal drawdowns of atmospheric CO2 on the planet. The timing of these blooms, controlled by ice breakup and light availability, influences global atmospheric CO2 concentrations. The reflection of cosmic radiation by polar ice helps protect the planet from high-energy particles from space. While Earth's magnetic field provides the primary protection from cosmic radiation, the high albedo of polar ice contributes to reflecting these particles away from the planet's surface. This effect is relatively small compared to other climate regulation functions, but represents another way polar regions influence global conditions. The formation of polar stratospheric clouds plays a crucial role in atmospheric chemistry, particularly in the destruction of ozone. These high-altitude clouds, which form only in the extremely cold conditions above polar regions, provide surfaces where chemical reactions can occur that lead to ozone depletion. The infamous ozone holes above both poles are directly related to the unique atmospheric conditions created by polar cold. The storage and release of methane in polar regions represents both a climate regulation mechanism and a potential climate tipping point. Permafrost and marine sediments in polar regions store enormous amounts of methane, a potent greenhouse gas. As polar regions warm, The release of this stored methane could accelerate global warming, representing a positive feedback that could amplify climate change. The influence of polar regions on global precipitation patterns extends far beyond their immediate vicinity. The polar ice caps affect the position and strength of storm tracks. The seasonal monsoon patterns that provide water to billions of people, and the distribution of precipitation across continents. Changes in polar conditions can therefore affect water resources and agricultural productivity in regions thousands of kilometers away. The role of polar regions in regulating global ocean pH is becoming increasingly important as the oceans absorb more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The cold, alkaline waters of polar regions help buffer changes in ocean pH, but this buffering capacity is being overwhelmed by rapidly increasing atmospheric CO2 concentrations. The polar oceans are becoming more acidic faster than tropical oceans, with potentially serious consequences for marine ecosystems. Recent research has revealed that polar regions play important roles in regulating atmospheric dust and aerosol concentrations. The high-pressure systems that typically develop over ice sheets create wind patterns that can transport dust and particles around the globe. Changes in polar atmospheric circulation can therefore affect air quality and atmospheric conditions in distant regions. The feedback loops between polar ice, ocean currents, and atmospheric circulation create complex interactions that can lead to rapid climate transitions. Paleoclimate research has shown that small changes in polar conditions can trigger much larger changes in global climate through these feedback mechanisms. Understanding these interactions is crucial for predicting how continued polar warming might affect global climate stability. The economic value of climate regulation services provided by polar regions is virtually incalculable. The prevention of catastrophic sea level rise, the regulation of global weather patterns, and the maintenance of ocean circulation systems provide benefits to human society that far exceed the value of most natural resources. Yet these services are largely invisible and unpriced in economic systems, making them vulnerable to degradation. Climate models consistently show that polar regions are key to understanding future climate change. The responses of polar ice sheets, sea ice, and ocean circulation to warming temperatures will largely determine how much global temperatures rise and how quickly. The polar regions are therefore not just indicators of climate change, they are the primary drivers of how climate change will unfold in the coming centuries. The frozen kingdoms that have existed for millions of years are transforming before our eyes at a pace unprecedented in human history. The polar regions, once considered the most stable environments on Earth, are now the front lines of global climate change. The impacts of warming temperatures, changing precipitation patterns, and altered ocean chemistry are cascading through polar ecosystems in ways that scientists are only beginning to understand. Arctic sea ice, the frozen platform that has supported polar ecosystems for millennia, is disappearing at an alarming rate. Since satellite monitoring began in 1979, the Arctic has lost sea ice at a rate of over 13% per decade during September, when ice coverage reaches its annual minimum. Some climate models predict that the Arctic Ocean could be essentially ice-free during summer months within decades, a transformation that would fundamentally alter Arctic ecosystems. The loss of sea ice habitat affects every level of Arctic marine food webs. Polar bears, the iconic predators of the Arctic, depend on sea ice for hunting seals, their primary prey. As ice coverage declines and becomes less predictable, polar bears must travel greater distances to find food, leading to reduced body condition, lower reproductive success, and population declines in many regions. Some populations have already shown significant decreases, and continued ice loss could drive this species toward extinction in the wild. Ringed seals, the primary prey of polar bears, are equally dependent on stable sea ice for successful reproduction. These seals create birthing layers in the snow above their breathing holes, providing protected environments for raising their pups. Warmer temperatures and changing precipitation patterns are making these snow structures unstable, leading to increased pup mortality and population declines. The timing of biological processes in polar regions is becoming increasingly mismatched with environmental conditions. Many Arctic species have evolved life cycles precisely timed to seasonal ice patterns that have been stable for thousands of years. As ice forms later and melts earlier, species that depend on specific ice conditions for breeding, feeding, or migration are finding themselves out of sync with their environment. Walruses in the Arctic are experiencing dramatic habitat changes as sea ice retreats beyond the shallow continental shelf areas where they feed. These massive marine mammals typically rest on ice floes between feeding trips to the seafloor. But as ice retreats into deep water, walruses are forced to come ashore in massive numbers. The resulting crowding leads to increased mortality, particularly among young animals, and reduces feeding efficiency for the entire population. The retreat of glaciers and ice sheets is exposing new habitats while destroying others. As glaciers retreat, they reveal bare rock and sediment that can be colonized by terrestrial and freshwater organisms. However, the loss of glacial ice also eliminates habitat for species adapted to cold, stable conditions. The balance between habitat creation and destruction varies by region, but the overall trend is toward loss of cold-adapted habitats. Ocean acidification, caused by increased absorption of atmospheric carbon dioxide, is particularly pronounced in polar waters. The cold temperatures that characterize polar seas increase the solubility of CO2, making these regions especially vulnerable to acidification. This chemical change affects organisms that build shells or skeletons from calcium carbonate, including many of the tiny marine organisms that form the base of polar food webs. The response of polar marine ecosystems to warming temperatures is complex and often counterintuitive. In some regions, reduced ice cover has led to increased primary productivity as more sunlight reaches the ocean's surface and the growing season extends. However, the species composition of these more productive systems is often dramatically different from historical communities, with warm water species replacing cold-adapted specialists. Changes in precipitation patterns are affecting polar ecosystems in unexpected ways. Some regions are experiencing increased rainfall, which can create ice layers that prevent animals from accessing food beneath the snow. These rain-on-snow events can cause mass mortality in populations of caribou, muskoxen, and other Arctic herbivores that depend on accessing vegetation buried under snow. The Antarctic Peninsula has experienced some of the most rapid warming on Earth, with temperatures rising by more than 3 degrees Celsius over the past 50 years. This warming has led to dramatic changes in penguin populations, with Adelie penguins declining in many areas as their sea ice habitat disappears, while Gentoo and chinstrap penguins, which prefer ice-free conditions, have expanded their ranges southward. The collapse of Antarctic ice shelves represents one of the most dramatic visible signs of polar change. Massive ice shelves that had been stable for thousands of years have broken apart in just a few weeks, releasing icebergs the size of small countries into the Southern Ocean. These collapses not only contribute to sea level rise, but also alter ocean circulation patterns and remove habitat for ice-dependent species. The warming of polar waters is allowing invasive species to colonize previously inaccessible regions. Ships traveling polar routes are introducing warm water species that can now survive in waters that were previously too cold. These biological invasions can disrupt established food webs and ecosystem relationships that have existed for millennia. Changes in wind patterns associated with climate change are altering the distribution and movement of sea ice. In some regions, changes in wind direction and strength are pushing ice away from traditional habitats, while in others, changing winds are bringing warmer air masses that accelerate melting. These changes in ice dynamics affect all species that depend on predictable ice patterns. The permafrost that underlies much of the Arctic is thawing at accelerating rates, releasing stored carbon and methane into the atmosphere. This thaw affects terrestrial ecosystems by altering drainage patterns and soil stability, but it also affects coastal marine ecosystems as thawing permafrost increases erosion and sediment inputs to polar waters. Some polar species are showing remarkable adaptability to changing conditions. Certain seabirds are shifting their breeding timing to match changes in food availability, while some fish populations are expanding their ranges into newly accessible habitats. However, these adaptations may not be sufficient to keep pace with the rapid rate of environmental change. The cascading effects of polar change extend far beyond polar regions themselves. Changes in polar ice coverage affect global weather patterns, potentially contributing to more extreme weather events in temperate regions. The loss of polar ice reduces the planet's ability to reflect solar radiation, accelerating global warming and creating feedback loops that amplify climate change. Research efforts in polar regions are intensifying as scientists race to understand and document changes before they fundamentally alter these ecosystems. New technologies, including autonomous underwater vehicles, satellite monitoring systems, and genetic analysis techniques, are revealing the complexity of polar ecosystem responses to environmental change. The economic implications of polar change are enormous, affecting everything from shipping routes and resource extraction to global food security and coastal infrastructure. The opening of Arctic shipping routes due to ice loss may provide economic opportunities, but also increases the risk of pollution and habitat disturbance in previously pristine environments. Conservation efforts in polar regions face unique challenges due to the global nature of climate change and the remoteness of polar ecosystems. Traditional conservation approaches that focus on protecting specific areas or species may be insufficient in the face of ecosystem-wide changes driven by global atmospheric and oceanic processes. The indigenous peoples of polar regions, who have lived in these environments for thousands of years, are experiencing some of the most direct impacts of polar change. Traditional hunting and traveling routes that have been used for generations are becoming unsafe or inaccessible as ice conditions become unpredictable. The loss of traditional ways of life represents not just cultural loss, but also the disappearance of invaluable knowledge about polar ecosystems. International cooperation has become essential for addressing polar change, as these regions and their effects extend beyond any single nation's boundaries. The Antarctic Treaty System and Arctic Council provide frameworks for international cooperation, but the challenges of managing change in polar regions require unprecedented levels of global coordination and commitment. The future of polar ecosystems depends largely on global efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and limit the extent of climate change. Some changes are already irreversible, but the magnitude of future changes can still be influenced by human actions. The survival of polar ecosystems may ultimately depend on humanity's willingness to recognize the global importance of these frozen kingdoms and take action to protect them. As we look toward the future of Earth's frozen kingdoms, we stand at a crossroads where human choices will determine the fate of some of the planet's most extraordinary ecosystems. The polar regions that have remained largely unchanged for millennia are now transforming rapidly, creating uncertain futures for the countless species that call these icy realms home. Yet within this uncertainty lies both challenge and opportunity, as our growing understanding of polar systems opens new possibilities for conservation, adaptation, and sustainable coexistence with these remarkable environments. The trajectory of polar ecosystems over the coming decades will largely depend on global efforts to address climate change. Under scenarios where greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise unchecked, the Arctic Ocean could become seasonally ice-free within decades, fundamentally altering Arctic ecosystems. The Antarctic Peninsula could experience continued rapid warming, while changes in wind and current patterns could destabilize parts of the massive Antarctic ice sheet. Such changes would create a world where today's polar ecosystems exist only in the historical record. However, aggressive action to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions could stabilize polar regions and preserve much of their current character. Under scenarios where global temperature rise is limited to 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, much of the Arctic sea ice would survive, though in altered form. Antarctic ecosystems might adapt to gradual changes while maintaining their essential character. The difference between these scenarios, continued rapid change versus managed transition, depends on decisions being made today about energy systems, land use, and global cooperation. The species of polar regions are already demonstrating remarkable adaptability to changing conditions. Some populations are shifting their ranges, following suitable habitat as it moves poleward. Others are adjusting their behavior, changing migration timing, breeding schedules, or feeding strategies to match new environmental conditions. The genetic diversity within polar species may provide the raw material for evolutionary adaptation to new conditions, allowing some populations to survive and thrive even in altered environments. Technological advances are creating new opportunities for monitoring and protecting polar ecosystems. Satellite technology now allows scientists to track individual polar bears across vast Arctic landscapes, monitor penguin colonies in remote Antarctic locations, and observe changes in ice coverage in real time. Autonomous underwater vehicles can explore beneath ice shelves, revealing previously unknown ecosystems and monitoring their responses to environmental change. These technological capabilities are enabling new forms of conservation that were previously impossible. Scientists can now identify critical habitats before they are lost, track the movements of endangered species across international boundaries, and develop early warning systems for ecological crises. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are being applied to vast data sets from polar regions, revealing patterns and relationships that help predict how ecosystems might respond to future changes. The concept of climate adaptation is becoming increasingly important for polar conservation. Rather than simply trying to preserve existing conditions, conservation efforts are beginning to focus on helping species and ecosystems adapt to unavoidable changes. This might involve creating corridors that allow species to move to new habitats, protecting areas that are likely to remain suitable as conditions change, or even assisting the migration of species to new locations where they can survive. Marine protected areas in polar regions are being designed with climate change in mind, protecting not just current habitats, but also areas that may become important as conditions change. Dynamic management approaches allow protection measures to shift with changing ice conditions, maintaining conservation benefits even as the physical environment transforms. The restoration of polar ecosystems presents both opportunities and challenges. In some regions, it may be possible to restore degraded habitats or reintroduce species that have been locally extirpated. However, restoration efforts in polar regions must account for the reality that the future environment may be fundamentally different from historical conditions. The goal may be to create resilient ecosystems that can function under new conditions rather than to recreate past states. International cooperation in polar regions is evolving to address new challenges and opportunities. The Antarctic Treaty System, which has successfully protected Antarctica from military activities and mineral exploitation for over 60 years, is being supplemented by new agreements focused on marine conservation and climate protection. In the Arctic, indigenous peoples' organizations are playing increasingly important roles in developing conservation strategies that incorporate traditional knowledge and respect indigenous rights. The economic future of polar regions is being shaped by both climate change and changing global markets. The retreat of Arctic sea ice is opening new shipping routes and making previously inaccessible resources available for extraction. However, the economic opportunities created by ice loss must be weighed against the environmental costs and the loss of ecosystem services provided by intact polar systems. Sustainable tourism in polar regions is growing rapidly, providing economic incentives for conservation while creating new pressures on fragile ecosystems. The challenge is developing tourism practices that provide benefits to local communities and support conservation efforts while minimizing environmental impacts. Advanced technologies and careful planning can help achieve this balance, but it requires ongoing attention and adaptive management. The role of polar regions in global climate regulation means that their conservation has benefits far beyond their boundaries. Protecting polar ice helps maintain global climate stability, while preserving polar ecosystems maintains their role in global biogeochemical cycles. The economic value of these global services far exceeds the costs of conservation, making polar protection a wise investment even from a purely economic perspective. Educational and outreach efforts are crucial for building public support for polar conservation. Virtual reality technologies now allow people to experience polar environments without physically visiting them, creating emotional connections that motivate conservation action. Citizen science projects engage the public in polar research, while social media and digital platforms spread awareness about polar ecosystems and their importance. The integration of traditional ecological knowledge from indigenous peoples with modern scientific understanding is creating more comprehensive and effective approaches to polar conservation. Indigenous communities have observed and adapted to polar environments for thousands of years, developing deep understanding of ecosystem relationships and natural variability. Combining this knowledge with modern scientific techniques provides the most complete picture of how polar ecosystems function and how they might respond to future changes. Genetic technologies are opening new possibilities for polar conservation. Genetic rescue efforts could restore diversity to isolated populations, while selective breeding programs might help develop populations adapted to new conditions. However, these technologies raise ethical questions about human intervention in natural processes and require careful consideration of potential unintended consequences. The study of polar ecosystems continues to reveal new species and new ecological relationships. Each research expedition discovers previously unknown organisms, often with unique adaptations that expand our understanding of life's possibilities. These discoveries not only add to our scientific knowledge, but also strengthen the case for protecting polar regions as reservoirs of biological diversity. Climate modeling and ecosystem forecasting are becoming increasingly sophisticated, providing better guidance for conservation planning and policy development. These models can explore different scenarios and help identify the most effective strategies for protecting polar ecosystems under various possible futures. However, the complexity of polar systems means that surprises are inevitable, requiring adaptive management approaches that can respond to unexpected developments. The future of polar ecosystems will ultimately depend on humanity's willingness to recognize their global importance and take action to protect them. These frozen kingdoms are not remote curiosities, but integral components of Earth's life support system. Their fate is intertwined with the fate of ecosystems and human societies around the world. The choices made in the coming decades will determine whether future generations inherit a world where polar bears still hunt on Arctic sea ice, where emperor penguins continue their remarkable breeding cycles on Antarctic ice, and where the microscopic communities within sea ice continue their ancient ecological processes. The frozen kingdoms have survived ice ages and global catastrophes, but they cannot survive the current rate of human-induced change without unprecedented global action. Yet there is reason for hope. Human ingenuity, international cooperation, and growing awareness of environmental interconnections are creating new possibilities for conservation and adaptation. The same technological and organizational capabilities that have created environmental challenges can be redirected towards solutions. The frozen kingdoms have proven remarkably resilient throughout Earth's history, and with appropriate human stewardship, they may continue to thrive and inspire future generations. The story of life beneath the polar ice is ultimately a story about adaptation, resilience, and the remarkable creativity of evolution in the face of extreme challenges. As we face our own challenges in a changing world, these polar ecosystems provide both warnings about the consequences of environmental change and inspiration about the possibilities for life to persist and flourish under even the most demanding conditions. The future of the frozen kingdoms remains unwritten, awaiting the choices and actions of a global community that is only beginning to understand their true importance. In the depths of polar waters, where ice meets ocean and life persists against impossible odds, we find a reminder of both the fragility and the resilience of life on Earth. The frozen kingdoms beneath our planet's ice represent more than just remarkable ecosystems adapted to extreme conditions. They are living libraries of evolutionary innovation, climate regulation systems essential for planetary stability, and windows into the fundamental processes that sustain all life on our planet. From the microscopic algae living within ice crystals to the massive whales that migrate thousands of kilometers to feed in polar waters, every organism in these frozen realms tells a story of adaptation, survival, and interconnection. The emperor penguins huddling through Antarctic winter, the polar fish with antifreeze in their blood, the ancient sponges building glass cities on the sea floor, each represents a unique solution to the challenges of life in conditions that would be instantly fatal to most organisms. These polar ecosystems function as the planet's climate control system, regulating temperature, driving ocean circulation, and influencing weather patterns across the globe. The ice that reflects solar radiation, the currents that transport heat around the world, and the biological processes that cycle carbon between atmosphere and ocean all demonstrate how local processes in polar regions have global consequences. The health of ecosystems thousands of kilometers from the poles depends on the continued functioning of these frozen kingdoms. Yet our exploration of these remarkable environments comes at a time when they face unprecedented change. The warming that is transforming polar regions represents one of the most rapid environmental changes in Earth's history, challenging species and ecosystems that have remained stable for millennia. The responses we observe, from shifting migration patterns to collapsing ice shelves, provide both early warnings of global change and insights into how life might adapt to new conditions. The story of polar ecosystems is also a story about the limits of human knowledge. Despite decades of research and increasingly sophisticated technology, we continue to discover new species, new ecological relationships, and new processes in polar regions. Each research expedition reveals previously unknown aspects of these systems, reminding us how much remains to be learned about life in extreme environments. The indigenous peoples who have lived in polar regions for thousands of years possess knowledge and perspectives that complement and enhance scientific understanding. Their observations of environmental change, their understanding of species behavior and ecological relationships, and their approaches to living sustainably in extreme environments provide crucial insights for both scientific research and conservation efforts. The economic and social implications of polar change extend far beyond the boundaries of polar regions themselves. Changes in polar ice affect sea levels that threaten coastal communities worldwide. Alterations in polar weather patterns influence agricultural productivity and water resources on every continent. The loss of polar ecosystems represents not just an environmental tragedy, but also an economic catastrophe of global proportions. Conservation efforts in polar regions face unique challenges that require unprecedented levels of international cooperation and innovative approaches. Traditional conservation strategies designed for more stable environments may be inadequate for ecosystems experiencing rapid change. New approaches that emphasize adaptation, resilience, and dynamic management may be necessary to preserve polar biodiversity in a changing world. The technological advances that enable us to study and monitor polar ecosystems also create new possibilities for their protection. Satellite monitoring, autonomous vehicles, genetic analysis, and artificial intelligence are providing tools that could revolutionize polar conservation. However, technology alone cannot solve the challenges facing polar regions. It must be combined with political will, economic resources, and global cooperation. The future of polar ecosystems depends on choices being made today about energy systems, land use, and international cooperation. The difference between scenarios where polar ecosystems collapse and those where they adapt and persist may depend on relatively small changes in human behavior at a global scale. The preservation of these frozen kingdoms requires recognizing their global importance and acting accordingly. Yet within the challenges facing polar regions lie opportunities for innovation, cooperation, and the development of new relationships between humans and the natural world. The same ingenuity that has allowed life to thrive in polar extremes can be applied to developing sustainable ways for humans to interact with these environments. The international cooperation necessary for polar conservation could serve as a model for addressing other global challenges. The study of polar ecosystems continues to provide insights that extend far beyond their boundaries. Understanding how life functions under extreme conditions informs research into medicine, biotechnology, and even space exploration. The adaptations that allow organisms to survive in polar environments may inspire solutions to human challenges, from food preservation to organ transplantation to surviving in extreme environments. Perhaps most importantly, the frozen kingdoms remind us of our planet's extraordinary capacity for supporting life in all its forms. The diversity of organisms that thrive beneath polar ice, from the smallest bacteria to the largest whales, demonstrates the creativity and resilience of evolution. Their existence expands our conception of what is possible and inspires wonder at the remarkable planet we inhabit. As we conclude our journey through these frozen kingdoms, we are left with both humility and hope. Humility at the recognition of how much we still do not know about these remarkable systems and how much damage has already been done. Hope at the evidence of life's remarkable adaptability and the growing awareness of the importance of these regions for global well-being. The dance of life beneath polar ice has continued for millions of years, through ice ages and warm periods, mass extinctions, and evolutionary radiations. Today, this ancient dance faces disruption on a scale unprecedented in human history. Whether it continues depends on our willingness to listen to the lessons these frozen kingdoms teach us about adaptation, resilience, and the interconnectedness of all life on Earth. The polar oceans call to us not as remote curiosities, but as integral parts of our planetary home. Their future is our future. Their health is our health, and their preservation is our responsibility. In protecting these frozen kingdoms, we protect not just remarkable species and ecosystems, but the stability and habitability of our planet itself. The eternal dance of life beneath the ice continues, but its rhythm is changing. How that rhythm evolves, whether it becomes a requiem for lost worlds or a song of adaptation and renewal, remains to be written. The choreography of this dance now depends not just on the forces of evolution and ecology that have guided it for millions of years, but also on the choices and actions of a single species that has gained the power to influence the fate of entire ecosystems. The responsibility is ours, and the time to act is now.